For 30 years, the origin of the Japanese people seemed settled. Two ancestral groups, one ancient, one more recent, blending together on an island chain, the genetic recipe written in textbook after textbook. Then, in 2021, a team drilling into fragments of ancient skull extracted something the textbooks never predicted. A third ancestor, one that had gone completely undetected, and a founding population so deeply isolated from the rest of humanity that its nearest genetic relatives live not across the sea in Korea, not in neighboring China, but on the distant plateaus of Tibet. If that sounds impossible, it is because the story of Japanese DNA is unlike anything geneticists have encountered anywhere else on Earth. And the reason it took this long to see it has nothing to do with the evidence being hidden. It has everything to do with where scientists were looking. To understand what changed, you first need to understand what everybody believed and why it felt so certain. In 1991, the physical anthropologist Kazuro Hanihara published what became known as the dual structure model. He had spent years comparing skulls and teeth from archaeological sites across the Japanese archipelago, measuring jaw angles, cranial widths, dental patterns, cataloging thousands of data points, and the conclusion was elegant. Modern Japanese people, he argued, were the product of two populations merging. First, the Jōmon, indigenous hunter-gatherers who had lived on the islands for over 10,000 years, building settlements, crafting the world's oldest known pottery, firing clay vessels at the Odai Yamamoto site in Aomori more than 16,000 years ago, 2 full millennia before anyone in Mesopotamia shaped a pot. And second, the Yayoi, migrants who crossed from the Korean Peninsula around 900 BCE, carrying with them the knowledge of wet rice cultivation that would transform Japanese society from scattered foragers into organized farming communities. The dual model was clean. It explained the archaeological record beautifully. Walk through any major Japanese museum today, and the story unfolds on the shelves. Jōmon skulls with broad faces, prominent brow ridges, and deep-set eyes sit alongside Yayoi-era remains that are flatter, more refined, recognizably closer to modern East Asian features. The physical contrast is visible to the naked eye. The Jōmon looked different from the people who followed them, and the teeth told the same story. Jōmon dental patterns matched a structure called sundodonti, common in Southeast Asia, while Yayoi teeth showed synodonty, associated with Northeast Asian populations. Genetic studies through the 1990s and 2000 kept confirming it, finding exactly the two-part signal Hanihara predicted. The Ainu people of Hokkaido and the Ryukyuans of Okinawa, separated by over 3,000 kilometers at opposite ends of the archipelago, clustered together genetically, both carrying higher traces of Jōmon ancestry than mainland Japanese. That geographic signature, 2 outlier populations bookending the islands, matched the model perfectly. But here is the problem with a theory that fits perfectly. Nobody checks what it might be missing. The dual model had a blind spot, and it was built into the tools. Classic genetic markers, the blood groups, serum proteins, and enzyme variants that researchers had been using since the 1960s could detect broad population differences, but they lacked the resolution to separate closely related waves of migration arriving centuries apart. If 2 genetically similar groups entered Japan at different times, those older methods would blend them into a single signal. Meanwhile, the few ancient DNA studies that existed in the early 2000s had focused almost entirely on Jōmon remains. The Yayoi period had contributed a handful of samples, and the Kofun period, the imperial transition from roughly 300 to 700 CE that saw the rise of centralized power, massive keyhole-shaped burial mounds, and the introduction of Chinese writing to Japan. 0 genomes. Not one Kofun individual had ever been sequenced. An entire era of Japanese history, 4 centuries of radical cultural transformation, was a blank page in the genetic record. That blank page is exactly where the old model broke down, and the reasons it stayed blank were not accidental. They were structural. Japan's climate is warm and humid, brutal conditions for ancient DNA preservation. Bones that would yield excellent genetic material in the cold caves of Europe or the dry deserts of Central Asia were often degraded beyond use in Japanese soil. Add to that the fact that many Kofun-era burial sites, particularly the massive keyhole-shaped tombs called kofun, are designated as imperial property by the Japanese government. They are protected, unexcavated, and legally untouchable. Researchers could not sequence what they could not access. And there was a subtler problem still. Because the dual model fit the available data so neatly, there was little institutional pressure to look further. When a model works, you stop testing it. When it explains the Ainu, the Ryukyuans, and the mainland gradient, why would you suspect a third ingredient was missing? If you only compare point A and point C, you might conclude that the difference between them is simple. But if you never look at point B, you cannot know what happened in between. And what happened in between, it turns out, was the single largest genetic event in Japanese history. The team that finally looked was led by Shigeki Nakagome, a genomic medicine researcher at Trinity College Dublin, working alongside Takashi Gakuhari at Kanazawa University. Their approach began not with a grand hypothesis, but with a specific kind of bone. Not a femur, not a rib. The petrous bone, a small, dense pyramid of tissue buried deep inside the inner ear, no larger than the last joint of your thumb. It is the hardiest bone in the human body, so compact that bacteria and moisture struggle to penetrate it. Because of that density, it preserves ancient DNA far better than any other skeletal element. In warm, humid climates like Japan's, where organic material degrades rapidly in acidic soil, this distinction is critical. Previous attempts to extract DNA from Japanese archaeological sites had often returned less than 1% usable genetic material, effectively noise. The petrous bone changed the equation entirely. Working in dedicated clean rooms at both Kanazawa University and Trinity College Dublin, the team carefully drilled into petrous bones and a single tooth from 14 ancient individuals excavated from 6 sites scattered across western and central Japan. The oldest, a female from Ehime Prefecture, had been dead for 9,000 years. The most recent, 3 skeletons from Ishikawa Prefecture, dated to the Kofun period, just 1,500 years ago. Those 3 Kofun genomes would become the first ever produced from that era. Before we see what their evidence reveals, if this story of discovery is pulling you in, subscribe so you do not miss future episodes where the evidence rewrites what we thought we knew. 12 of the 14 samples yielded usable sequences. 9 Jōmon, 3 Kofun. And when the data came back, it did not match the dual model. The statistical tool they used is called CupeWave, which tests whether an observed population can be explained as a mixture of known ancestral sources. For the Yayoi period individuals, a 2-way admixture of Jōmon and Northeast Asian ancestry fit cleanly. But for the Kofun individuals, that same 2-source model failed. The math rejected it. Something else was present, a third ancestral component, one with strong genetic affinity to Han Chinese populations from the Yellow River and West Liao River regions. The researchers then ran a 3-way admixture model, Jōmon plus Northeast Asian plus East Asian, and the Kofun data locked into place. What does that mean in human terms? It means that sometime around 300 CE, a new wave of people arrived in the Japanese archipelago, likely from the southern Korean Peninsula, carrying ancestry that was genetically distinct from both the Jōmon and the earlier Yayoi migrants. These were not just a few traders or diplomats. Their genetic signature is massive. Approximately 71% of modern mainland Japanese ancestry traces to this Kofun-era influx. 13% traces to the original Jōmon, 16% to the Yayoi. The group that arrived last left the deepest mark. 3 lines of evidence make this finding hard to dismiss. First, what the genomes show. The Kofun individuals require a three-source model that the Yayoi individuals do not. This is not a matter of interpretation or statistical ambiguity. The two-way model is mathematically rejected for Kofun samples with high confidence. A third source is present, and it is real. Second, what the finding rules out. If the Kofun transition had been purely cultural, a matter of new ideas spreading without new people, the genetic profile of Kofun-era individuals should look like Yayoi individuals with perhaps minor drift. Instead, they carry a substantial component that does not exist in any Yayoi sample. Random genetic drift does not produce that. Gradual assimilation over a few generations does not produce that. Only a significant population movement does. Third, what it implies. The Kofun period was when Japan transformed from a collection of farming communities into a centralized state. Massive burial mounds were constructed for a new ruling class. Chinese characters appeared on metal implements, swords, and mirrors. Political structures emerged that would define the archipelago for centuries. Now we know that this cultural revolution coincided with a demographic one. It was not just ideas crossing the strait. It was people. But the tripartite model raises as many questions as it answers. Some remain genuinely unresolved. The Kofun individuals sequenced in this study were not buried in the grand keyhole-shaped mounds reserved for elites. They were lower-ranking people, ordinary members of society. This means we still do not know the genetic profile of the Kofun ruling class. Were they the migrants themselves? Were they descended from the earlier Yayoi elite who adopted continental customs? To answer that, someone would need to sequence remains from inside the Great Tombs, and many of those are protected as imperial property, off-limits to excavation by Japanese law. There is also the deeper mystery of the Jōmon themselves, and it predates any question about the Kofun. Their lineage diverged from all other East Asian populations between 20,000 and 15,000 years ago, a split so ancient it predates the divergence of the ancestors of modern Chinese, Koreans, and even Native Americans. When you plot Jōmon DNA on a phylogenetic tree, they branch off. Before nearly every other East Asian group, sitting on a limb so old it connects to the base of the entire East Eurasian family. They are not a regional variant of some broader population. They are a relic of one of the earliest waves of humans ever to reach the Pacific coast. And yet, their closest living genetic relatives are not their geographic neighbors. The Ainu of Hokkaido carry roughly 79% Jōmon-like ancestry. The Ryukyuans of Okinawa carry about 28%. But across the sea, the population that shares the most unexpected affinity with the Jōmon is the indigenous peoples of Taiwan, suggesting an ancient coastal migration route from Southeast Asia that hugged the Pacific Rim thousands of years before rice farming existed. Then there is haplogroup D. On the Y chromosome, Japanese men carry a lineage called DM55 at remarkably high frequency. Outside Japan, you will barely find it. Not in Korea, not in China, not in Southeast Asia, where Michael Hammer's surveys of over 1,000 men across 20 populations turned up 0 carriers. The only other population on Earth where a closely related branch of haplogroup D appears at comparable levels is Tibetan men living on a plateau 5,000 kilometers away, separated by oceans, deserts, and the entire breadth of China. The two branches are estimated to have separated roughly 50,000 years ago. That is not a coincidence you can explain with recent contact. It is a ghost signal from a migration so ancient, it predates the last glacial maximum, a trace of movement along corridors that no longer exist, through landscapes that are now ocean floor. Meanwhile, the Jōmon population itself remained extraordinarily small. Modeling based on runs of homozygosity in an 8,800-year-old Jōmon individual suggests an effective population of just 1,000 people maintained for millennia. 1,000, on an island chain stretching 4,000 kilometers. They were not merely isolated. They were one of the most genetically bottlenecked populations of modern humans ever documented, and yet they persisted, adapted, and invented ceramic technology before almost any civilization on Earth. Today, across the Japanese archipelago, the proportions of these three ancestral layers vary in ways you can map prefecture by prefecture. In Okinawa, Jōmon ancestry reaches 28.5%. In the Northeast, around 19%. In Western Japan, closer to the Korean Peninsula, and the historical entry point for continental migrants, it drops to 12%. The gradient is not random. It is the geographic fingerprint of successive waves of migration, each pushing further into the archipelago, each mixing more or less thoroughly depending on terrain, distance, and time. If this hidden chapter of Japan's origins intrigued you, subscribe to stay with us as the ancient DNA revolution continues to rewrite histories we thought were finished. Somewhere in a university lab, the petrous bone of a Kofun-era skeleton still holds sequences no one has read. The tombs of the ruling class remain sealed, and inside the DNA of 125 million living Japanese people, three ancient populations continue their silent conversation, a conversation that was invisible until someone thought to listen for a third voice. The Jōmon survived for over 10,000 years, with a population of roughly 1,000, invented the world's oldest pottery, and carried a genetic lineage that connects them to Tibet and Taiwan, but almost nowhere in between. So here is the question that still has no answer. If the Jōmon were among the earliest modern humans to reach East Asia, taking a coastal route from the south tens of thousands of years ago, what happened to all the other populations that must have traveled alongside them?